Okie doke, I think we'll start. Hi everyone, welcome to ArtsFest Online. This evening's event is a literary salon with publisher Myriad Editions and 4 of their authors, including Elleke Boehmer, Elaine, Chiew and Hannah Vincent, who will discuss and read from their recent short story collections. The session will be hosted by Dr. Elleke Boehmer, fellow Myriad author and senior lecturer in creative writing at the University of Wolverhampton. They will also be joined by Myriad's publishing director, Candida Lacey. If you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A box and we'll go through them at the end of the talk. Welcome everyone. Over to you, Lisa.
Hello, good evening everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. As Claire said, this is the Myriad Literary Salon. Here at Wolverhampton, we've had a bit of a short story focus to our autumn semester, so I thought it'd be a really good way to tie up all that the students have been exploring through their own practice, and join forces with my own publisher and my esteemed colleagues there as well, to talk about short stories, the form and also the publication of our collections, because all of the authors here have all had their collections out in the past couple of years. Some of us have had collections out during lockdown. So here's how it's kind of going to work. Each author will give us a quick reading, a quick 5-minute reading, a snapshot from their collection. And then we're going to talk about how the collection kind of came about, so origins and ideas and subjects and themes and contexts, etc. And then, we're going to start with Elaine, we'll move on to Hannah and then to Elleke, and then the event will sort of move to a close where we'll talk to Candida, our publishing director, who will offer some information and insight in terms of what Myriad look for in short story collections and why she chose to publish all of us. So I really hope you get some, this is a really good opportunity to get some information and insight from us all as active short story writers. And Elaine, I'm going to hand over to you without further ado, because you're joining us live from Singapore at 2:30 in the morning. And it's lovely to see you. I mean, it's just such a treat for me to see you all as well, because it's normally we'd be all on the festival circuit, wouldn't we? But the power of Zoom means we can all get together in this way as well. So I'm going to over to you, Elaine, another prize-winning short story writer, and you're going to be reading from your collection, The Heartsick Dysphoria.
Diaspora. Yeah, no, thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much. And yes, I'll be reading Chinese Almanac, a story about a not bland Asian American family. My father lives by the Chinese Almanac, Tongsing. It tells fortunes, like when might be a good day to marry your lover or move house or landscape a garden. Me, I have no truck with that kind of hocus pocus. Keep it simple. 2 rules. You don't turn down food. You stay the fuck out of your parents' love life. Born in the year of the horse, I'm pretty good at running. My sister Tina calls to say that Mom's best friend, Mrs. Poon, has died. She died last week. Tina announces. 1 minute she was crunching salted peanuts, next thing, her face fell smack on the mahjong table between the 5 bamboos in the south wind. Mom wept that Mrs. Poon didn't pay attention to the signs from the almanac. She had hot ears and twitching eyelids the entire day she died. You know what they call that? Tragedy about to strike. I mumble. I thought it meant someone was cursing you behind your back. Tina ignores me. Reminds me to pick up the turkey from Delmonico's. P.S., Tina says, Dad's been having hot ears every night, consulting his almanac, and keening. Last night, Mom chased him around the house, wielding her vibrator, yelling why they no longer have sex. Though I'm even less tuned in to my Chinese roots than Tina, who makes Mom look good in this respect, I know she's making this shit up. The almanac may be useful to consult regarding where to place the bakwa or water feature to stimulate mountains of wealth, or inauspicious days to dig a grave or fell trees. But it is dead silent about when to have relations with a bereaved wife. You know this year's turkey is going to be a boondoggle when you arrive at your home doorstep and find your mother dressed in lycra and flirting with the UPS delivery guy. The clip on his lapel says, Hernan. Mom has got her hair up with a scrunchie and she's pasted on false lashes that look like furry caterpillars. Her leotard is fuchsia pink. Her thighs look like hot water bottles. Hernan claps me on the back. Hermano, this the intern doctor from the city? Looks like you should doctor yourself, eh? He gives my thick-cut midriff a mock punch. Too many kung pao chickens right here, he sniggers. I give Hernan my best jaundiced eye. To Mom, I say, I found you a 10-pounder like you requested. I swing the trussed-up turkey in the Delmonico bag, barely missing Hernan. Tina appears, looking like a twin upgraded 2.0 version of Mom, but in pigtails. Dad's in the garden shed, hiding, she whispers. Mom snaps her heels around, lets the screen door shut with a bang. When I go to find Dad, he's hunkered in the gloom next to the pitchfork still clumped with soil, cleaning his garden shears. Pa, you okay? I ask. He speaks in Mandarin. Your mother offers the UPS bad dude Red Bull and chocolate chip cookies. The guy has a crawdad tattoo on his arm. I hope I've understood him correctly. UPS and Red Bull were in English. Crawdad because I saw it on Hernan's arm. This is how we've always communicated, in two languages that don't have a common root, and I fill in between the brackets with my imagination for words I don't understand. You've pulled up all the weeds but left the roots, Dad. Sex, sex, sex! That woman's like a horny rabbit. 兔子, the Chinese words for rabbit, I actually understand. I help Dad bag the mulch and weed cuttings in black trash bags. Cleaning up is what I do best with him. Dad blows one nostril with a fingertip, leaving a dark smudge. So now he looks like a sad clown. You can't trust a woman who beats her eggs with a rotary egg beater. What's wrong with a good old-fashioned fork? He flicks his fingers. Soil flies everywhere. Did you know? Before your Uncle Gerald died, he asked me to find a way for him to have virtual sex with a transsexual. Well, good for him, I say. Dad frowns. Married for 27 golden years, and he wants to have virtual sex with a transsexual? He should be so lucky, I say. What's the matter with you? I'm telling you. Dad raises his voice. People aren't what they seem. You spend your whole life with someone. Your whole life. And lo, she wakes up one day and he's not the same person you went to bed with the night before. He suddenly switches to English. Tell me, Pooch, why that happened? Dad, don't call me Pooch. Dad's shoulders sag. He says, Ye kung hao long? Dad, I don't know what that means. I've never seen him so full of non sequiturs before. Lord Ye, you know. He say he love dragon, but really he fear dragon.
Oh, that was lovely. That was lovely. I love how just dark humor that runs all the way through your work, Elaine. Just such wonderful, vibrant characters. And one of the things that you really play on is this idea of role reversal, isn't it, as well? But I wondered if I could just start our conversation with a bit more of a practical question, which is somebody like yourself is obviously, you've kind of used the competition platform, haven't you, to kind of get your stories out there. I know, for example, you've won the Bridport Prize, the prestigious Bridport Prize twice, is that right? And shortlisted for all sorts of others. I mean, how important has that platform been to you in terms of your literary career?
Because I'm a transplant and immigrant to the shores, so I didn't really at the time think about doing an MFA. I think it would have been a lot easier if I had done an MFA, but because I had my kids, they were very young at the time, so it was just really hard to try to juggle everything. So I did use the competition platform, and it's definitely a very useful way to get noticed.
Yeah, it's often a kind of numbers game, isn't it? Did you find it was just a really good way to get started, but also a really good way of giving yourself like deadlines or working to creative prompts?
I think it's an excellent way to set yourself deadlines. But I think also it actually helps you tap into a community of writers, because there's lots of writers, who don't have, either the ability or, the financial means to get an MFA, will actually try to band together, get together, and you critique each other's stories. You sort of, urge each other on, you cheer each other on. And so I think that really was one of the main benefits. So actually from just that group, I got to know Vanessa Gebbie, I got to know Tanya Hirschman. So so that for me was also a huge benefit.
Yeah, and I mean, it is really important. It's just like us doing this event tonight, that importance of us as a community of writers. One of the things that we all do is really support each other. And actually, as our careers get more and more established, we often kind of end up judging each other in competitions, isn't it, as well? But you and I kind of share that in the sense, because in a way, that's how my short story career began, because I won The Guardian. But as I always say to people, if you're going to enter competitions, be prepared to win, because I wasn't. And I often feel like I missed a lot of opportunities because I wasn't ready for it. But again, you and I share a very similar background in the sense that both our collections took almost a decade to be put together. So, I mean, can you just give us a little bit of an insight how everything started and to that publication?
Lisa, I really relate to what you're saying about sort of not being prepared to win, because I had just started writing and I was not expecting that I would even place in the Britport for the first time I entered, let alone win it. So I think that part of it is also being prepared, but being prepared doesn't just mean being able to write. It also means taking on the culture and the habit of being a writer. And I wasn't even willing to tell my family at the time that I was a writer. I wasn't even willing to call myself that. So I had a lot of learning to do, a huge learning curve. And also, I was also a little bit all over the place in terms of just my voice, because I had lived in so many different places. And I suppose that's really the meaning of diaspora for me, because, I had lived in the States, I had worked in the States, I had worked in Hong Kong, I've lived in lots of different places in Asia. I'm now based in Singapore, but, and then I immigrated to Britain. So, with all these different hybrid selves within me, this conflation of multiple identities, for a period of time, I was just sort of casting around, trying to find a definitive voice. And I think that was really sort of in some ways where I started going astray, because it's okay to not just have one definitive voice. I just maybe needed somebody to tell me that, that it's all right you hear the mantra, that a story collection should have variety, but how much variety is okay, so it's partly that as well. So, the Hearts of Diaspora has, there's multiple time periods, there are lots of different voices. There's slang in here, there's different languages, like you heard, there's Chinese in there, and even in Chinese there's 3 different dialects that's in there. And that for me actually is the true, it represents what Singapore is now. It's this hodgepodge of, this, melting pot of different languages. So being able to do that with Myriad was really special. It's not every single publisher that can actually understand that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? And I'm going to just sort of throw this out to Hannah and Elleke as well, if I may, because I think what we all share is this idea that we do focus upon place, you know, that we all seem to be place writers as well as people writers, and that we're kind of drawing on all our lived experiences in the different places that we have felt a sense of belonging to or a sense of rootedness in. It all seems to infiltrate all through our collections. Do you know what I mean? So it's clearly something that we all share.
I'm jumping in there to say, I mean, I completely agree with what you've both been saying. This question of kind of voice being all over the place, and trying to pin it down, and maybe sometimes realizing, especially when stories are about, you know, movement or diaspora, as Elaine's are, realizing that it's okay to have a voice that slips between, you know, borderlines and languages and dialects, and it's kind of part of the global condition that we're all in, you know, that even stories that are quite rooted in one place are kind of irradiated by the stories that have moved through that place, you know. So that's a different kind of mobility. So yes, I agree that there's you know, that voice travels.
Yeah.
And I think maybe just one other quick thing is for me, the short story is such a brilliant, powerful way of mapping a place, you know, mapping a character's journey. If I look back at my collection, To the Volcano, there's so many stories of characters moving from one place to another, even in terms of their understanding, you know. Yeah.
It is. And if I can just kind of stick with that for a minute, because obviously, you know, some of my stories feature a Potteries dialect. And, you know, sometimes I get asked to write stories that are purely written in dialect, you know, and Elaine, just listening to the different kind of dialects that you're bringing into your writing, I mean, don't you find that it's really important that we still like fly the flag for these dialects, and that the short story sometimes often allows us to do that, because you've got a very small snapshot of a place and actually you can do so much with it in terms of portraying character?
Yeah, no, definitely. Although hailing from, you know, the Asia part of the continent, in terms of just their dialects, you know, some part of it has to do also with the audience you're trying to reach, you know. So sometimes, this is the thing, this is why I love, you know, writers like Alice Monroe and you know, Claire Keegan, you know, you can actually go provincial, you know. But having said that, there is constantly this pressure, and we debate this a lot as well in Asia, you know, with Asian writers. How provincial can you go? You know, how much dialect can you put in? Can you render an entire story in dialect, in Singlish, for example, and hope to reach a global audience? So that's a different, slightly more political question.
Yeah, so it's almost like putting the onus on the reader rather than the authorial intention, isn't it, in a way? In which case, I mean, you know, if you think, I was thinking about your work the other day, because one of the things I think that really connects all your stories is food. And you know, I always remember as an undergrad, actually, and it wasn't on the course at all, but somebody gave me the novel Like Water for Chocolate, Laura Esquivel, and I still love it now. But yeah, as Hannah is saying in the chat, you know, it's the universal language of food, but it's the way you craft it as part of identity that I thoroughly admire. Where's all that come from? How can I borrow it?
It's interesting you say that. Actually, it was a throwaway comment from a writer friend in Britain who said to me, you know, there's so much food in your stories. It almost seems as if the Malaysian and Singaporean identity is circled, you know, it's concentrated around food. And I thought about it and I thought, that's true. You know, and one of the things that came out when I was exploring the collection and how to pull it together in terms of the thematics is that actually I can't really just lump Malaysians and Singaporeans together either.
No,
There has to be a common enough. I mean, there's a lot of similarities in terms of the cultures because of the overlapping history and British colonial history as well. But it's diverged enough at this moment in time that there are quite a lot of differences. So food happens to be one of those strands that can actually pull it together because we share a lot of the same cuisine still. So I'm talking about Malaysian char kway teow. In Singapore, they would absolutely believe that it tastes the same even. So it does act as this sort of what you call it, this binder between cultures.
And it's so much. I suppose in a way I'm slightly envious in terms of coming from Stoke, where the most famous thing to come out of Stoke is the oat cake. And it's one of those with the secret recipe that nobody will ever tell you. But I suppose with Asian culture, food is so part of it. It's Hannah, I wonder if we can bring you in now. And for you to share with us your reading from She Clown and Other Stories. I noted actually today when I was writing down a few notes, I thought, oh, you all have and other stories after your titles, and I didn't.
Yeah, but you don't want to touch your title because it's so brilliant on its own terms, isn't it?
Yeah, I know, but I just noticed. I know. I think it was a nightmare.
Can I just say also, you haven't got a story called "It's Gone Dark After Bill's Mothers,"
true.
so it can't be that and other stories.
There you go, everybody.
There's method in the madness.
And perhaps a title with less apostrophes is mine. But Hannah, She Clown and Other Stories, and you've come dressed as the part, which is what you normally do when performing and reading from your work, which I thoroughly enjoy and admire. What are you reading for us tonight? We've gone from Singapore to Brighton.
Well, I'm talking to you from Brighton, but yes, I'm going to read, and actually She Clown, I do imagine it taking place actually at a friend's house just up the hill from where I am. But I'm quite careful, unlike, I think the three of you, I'm quite careful not to be too specific about place, I think, in my writing. I do it in my novels as well. I try and avoid being too specific about place. And certainly in this collection, for me, place is the female body, I would say, and that actually, hopefully, the reader kind of has a journey through the female body as they kind of read these stories. But yeah, I'll read you from the title story, beginning of She Clown, which again, I was relating to what you were saying with Elaine, because this was a story. I'm trying to remember how it began, but I think it was, and Elaine hinted at this, our kind of peculiar nature as poverty-stricken writers. I was like casting around, kind of saw the Manchester Fiction Prize had a 10 grand prize. I thought, £10,000, yes please, I'll have a go, it's worth it, I'll have a go. And that was really what got the ball rolling, it was pure financial kind of need, because I didn't win it, but I got shortlisted for it, and then all of a sudden I find myself a short story writer, because then, and we can talk about this later, but Candida was like, oh, what, have you got any other stories? And I was like, I probably have. And when I looked, I had nearly 20 short stories that I've been writing since, for like 20 years. Anyway.
I think that's really important for everybody to know, though, isn't it? The fact that actually all of us have been writing for what feels like donkeys. But what you're kind of doing is that you're just bettering your trade, aren't you, really? You practice, you're learning all the time. You get to meet other people. It is about not being afraid to network, to share, all the things that, all of us teach, we're all in universities. It's kind of one of the things that we say, isn't it?
And actually, one of the things that you were talking about as well, Elaine, when you said about working with a community of writers, and we've got we're very lucky with Myriad that we have a community within the community, because it's such a kind of a close and intimate kind of organization to be published by. Thank you, Mummy Candida. But at Manchester, on the kind of night of the readings, I met somebody there, Jane Fraser, whose short story collection was published by Salt this year, or was it last year? And I know Jane from the circuit because of the work we've done with Claire Keegan, who's a fantastic short story writer who offers workshops, and I'd encountered Jane at several of those workshops, so we already had a kind of understanding of each other, and it was really nice to kind of go, oh, you too, you also wanted the £10,000 prize. Yeah, so that community is really important to kind of build for yourself, I think, as a writer. It's our support network, isn't it, as much as anything, because we're all kind of doing this crazy thing, sitting on our own, making up stories and making up people and putting on our makeup. So to kind of to have other people that are doing the same thing is very it's comforting.
Can I just ask though, just before you start, Hannah, rather than, because I think you're saying a very, very important point, which is very useful to any of the students that are out there watching this, and I'm sure Elleke and Elaine, you feel exactly the same way. Don't we all still get nervous reading? And that sort of idea that it's part of that writer career though now, isn't it? And this idea that we do have to almost perform our work. You're not just writing, but you're performing your work as well, aren't you? And that's how do you're obviously better at it than I am, Hannah, as you were saying before. Yeah, you wear the mask and but it is that, isn't it? It's about, but I suppose the more you do it, the more confident you become at doing it, and you judge audience responses. And
it was a game changer for me. I came from a theatre background, so I am more comfortable perhaps with the performance element than some writers who might dread it or might be quite shy people. But actually it was an absolute game changer for me to drive my material out on a live audience. This was way before I got published. The first time I stepped up in front of an audience, I'd gone to an event where they were having open mic, and I got up to read very early short story that I'd written, and the first thing I did was go, I'll start again.
Yes, yeah.
Because I had that, my throat wouldn't work because I was so tense and nervous. So but that was the first of several occasions when I then kind of put myself out there and just to test the material, to test myself, to hear how it sounded, not just to myself, but also knowing that other people were listening to it as well. It's almost like you can hear it through other people's eyes, which is, I think, why it works as an editing technique, to record yourself and hear yourself reading the words can be really helpful in terms of the craft. Oh, I don't need that word. Oh, I stumbled over that kind of sentence structure, so that doesn't work, so it's helpful as an editing kind of technique. And it's a bit like when I was a playwright, turning up on the first night and sitting in the dark with the audience and watching the play on stage through their eyes almost. And I think reading aloud is a bit like that. You can hear it in a fresh way, and it's helpful.
And it's important, isn't it? I think that's really important, because I hear the voices first. That's what I always say.
Your stories are so vivid in terms of their voices. You can hear that, you can hear them. Yeah.
They invariably come to me in a Stoke accent. And then what I almost have to do is kind of re-listen to them, but actually reading them aloud makes me try and work out how I can, sometimes that Stoke accent isn't right. Do you know what I mean? Do you find that, Elaine, with your work? Sorry, Hannah, we're putting off your reading here, but do you find that with your work, Hannah, Elaine, sometimes if you're choosing sort of different nationalities, dialects to represent, that some are absolutely right for a specific story, and then sometimes you think, actually, no, I'm trying to force it, and it needs to be, that dialect doesn't need to be there. I need to pull it back.
No, definitely. I am very, very careful in terms of just, the balance to try in terms of how to get it enough down that you get a sense of the character, but not be overwhelming. We are all not just writing for ourselves, are we?
No.
So I don't have like the perfect reader in mind,
No.
I don't know if any of us do really, but I still do in some ways pay attention to how it will go across, and more I also think that even just if there's no dialect, even if it's just completely in English, how that character would say something it's very, very individual to that character's experiences, the way that you've dreamed it out, you know?
Yeah.
So I definitely do pay quite a lot of attention to that.
Yeah, oh, I can tell that. Okay, Hannah, we're distracting from your reading. Let me mute myself.
She Clown needs her glasses. Okay, She Clown. Charlie parked her car outside the house. The arrangement of the upper windows and front door of the building gave it a quizzical expression. What are you doing here? It seemed to ask. I'm She Clown, Charlie said out loud, practicing the voice. There you go, practicing the voice she would use when she greeted today's customer. She checked her makeup in the rearview mirror. The eyelashes she had drawn around her eyes looked like dark rays around two dark suns. She twisted the mirror away from her and smoothed the velvet of her costume, feeling the resistance of the fabric, its fibres moving backwards and forwards under her fingertips as she stroked it one way and then the other, from smooth to rough, then rough to smooth. She opened the glove compartment and took out a handful of balloons, stuffing them in the pocket of her pantaloons. Then she pulled out a box of condoms and slid one inside her top pocket. Her bowler hat and patchwork coat lay on the back seat. She got out of the car and put on the coat, even though the afternoon was sultry. She placed the bowler hat on her head, pulling its elastic strap under her chin as she turned towards the house. 2 pink balloons were pinned to the front door. Charlie banged the knocker and waited. She could hear music and voices from inside. She knocked again. You must be the magician lady, said the woman who opened the door. She wore a tight-fitting cream dress and thin gold bangles on each wrist. Identical twin girls stood either side of her in the doorway, wearing matching t-shirts decorated with sequined butterflies. I'm She Clown, Charlie said. The woman invited her inside the house. The girls ran ahead of them down the hallway. Music was playing in a bright, modern kitchen that looked out onto a garden. A woman, also wearing a cream outfit, but with strappy sandals, was talking in a loud voice. Men have to be managed, she was saying, like farm animals. You probably know half the people here, the mother said, turning to Charlie. And it was true that Charlie did recognise some of the faces. One of the men had sat in her car. She had given him a blowjob. She recognised his moccasin shoes. Another man in a pink Ralph Lauren shirt had fucked her in a laundry room among mountain bikes and drying washing while his wife gave out party bags.
You know what, I do admire your work, Hannah, because as we were talking about before, and I think it's something that Sarah Hall says about that short stories allow us to really enter the darker side of the human psyche. Do you feel that's kind of where you end up going, just sort of naturally, or do you think it's something that you start to interrogate really through your work?
I think possibly there is something about the form that lends itself to that. You know, I'm not a fan when crime writers refer to, oh, I like to write about the dark side, I like my novels are so dark. I'm not a fan of that kind of dark. But I think there's something about the form, short form, and the way perhaps that we are introduced to it as young children, and the kind of heritage of some of those most familiar stories, which can be quite gruesome. You know, I'm thinking about Cinderella's so-called ugly sisters carving off their toes and heels so that they can stuff their feet into the glass slipper that is then filled with blood, things like that, which you know we come to at a seminal age, you know, a really formative age. And so possibly there is something about writing short form that kind of drives in a certain direction. And possibly it is a matter of taste, in that, you know, I am a big fan of Angela Carter, and she certainly deals with that, and Flannery O'Connor, she certainly deals with that kind of dark, intense, the capacity for humans to behave in an appalling and kind of outlandish way, and in violent ways quite often. but it's slightly contained because the short story perhaps is playful as a form. It's playful, and so there's almost an extent to which we can say kind of harsh things or present these kind of stark images and then go, oh, I was only joking, it's over now. Switch on the lights. You know, we're not asking anybody to immerse themselves in something seedy and debasing or you know, or unpleasant. We're just giving them a short, sharp shock and saying, yeah, what do you think of that?
Yeah, because I think in a way it's one of the things that I always say. It's that what I love about the short story is reading a short story and you get to the end and you think you're more interested in the story that hasn't been written, but it's the one you're left thinking about.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Love that, Lisa. That's great. Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I absolutely love about them. Did you, I mean, was short stories your kind of, is that what you cut your teeth on, or did you start with longer work?
No,
or plays? Was it plays?
I started with plays, yeah. So it's very much not short stories. Started with plays and then moved on to novels, long form fiction, and then only came and kind of, you know, along the way, kind of writing short stories almost as a compulsion, but never kind of completing them to my satisfaction until Candida then kind of, you know, just asked, you know, have you got any? And that's when I was kind of, you know, then kind of driven back to those short stories to have a look at them. But somebody, in fact, it was Monica Alley. I met her at a wedding once, and she said, this is before I'd written any novels, but I was starting to write prose as against drama, and she advised me to try out my kind of writing, to kind of discover my kind of craft by writing short stories. And I don't agree that that's a good, you know, that's good advice, because they're so different to write. Completely different, almost like a completely different craft, certainly requiring different skills. And I find them really hard in a way that I don't find novel writing quite so hard. I don't find it so punishing. It's like a big immersive, you know, wallow around in a novel, even though my novels are quite kind of, you know, they're short, long form. They kind of tend to be quite short novels, but definitely short stories, I think, they operate in a different way, which I think it puts a lot of pressure on the writer to kind of understand the mechanism and to kind of, you know, mistress it, you know.
Yeah, it's a craft, isn't it? I mean, how do you feel, Elleke and Elaine, about it? Because often I always find that, you know, if I do events, people will often ask me when my next novel is coming out, but not when my next short story collection is coming out. And I always find that really interesting when I sometimes feel like I am a short story writer at heart, and this form is amazing and it's a craft, and it takes 10 years to get, well, it took me 10 years to get a really good collection out. You know, what are your thoughts on its reputation and its status, really?
Well, I agree with Hannah. Its intensity can be really punishing. It requires a discipline, you know, the brevity and the intensity and the focus, and writing at the same time that story that's on the surface and the story that's below that we've been pointing to. All of that is such, you know, requires such concentration. And then out there in the world, it doesn't have the same status as the novel, which I think is such a pity. I mean, Elaine's already mentioned Alice Monroe, but I want to give another shout out to her. She's also my sort of goddess mentor figure. You know, the day, I remember the day, it was 2013. I think it was the 6th or 3rd of October when she won the Nobel Prize. And I just, you know, I punched the air. I was in a class actually of school children, and we were talking about prizes. and I said, you know, the Nobel Prize is going to be announced any minute. And of course they were all looking at their phone, and somebody shouted it out. And that was a good day for short stories, because it's an amazing medium. I love the medium. I also take 10 years to put together a collection. And I think it needs more credit.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, and I think this is news to most people, isn't it, really, that collections do take a long time to put together. You know, I think we're all in that same boat, aren't they, where we've had 8, 9, 10 years from first story to publication date. It's
mine by the ages of my children. You know, some of the stories are about young children, and my oldest child is 23, so do the math. That's how long it took me to
just sticking with you, Hannah, and going back to your collection though, if I may, because one of the things, and I noticed that there was a couple of people who just put in the chat, whoa, that was a subversion of expectations in terms of what you were saying. And I think that is incredibly true of your work, and also in terms of what Elaine was reading as well. And it's this idea of not fearing your subject.
Not fearing it, did you say?
Yeah. Not fearing what you really want to say about it.
And I think quite often, and again, I think this happens whenever you're in the zone writing, and it's that kind of magical moment that people get quite spooky about, when you suddenly go, oh, hang on, she's going to give everyone a blowjob. She's giving blowjobs to all the dads at the party. You know, I mean, somebody asked me, where did you get that idea from? And I couldn't actually remember. So Lord knows where it came from. You know, I can see where I get other elements of the story from, but it's like, I think when you're in the zone and you're kind of open to the writing experience, and you're open to that kind of the darkness of your own imagination, or the bitiness of the kind of form, then something comes in and you go, okay, that's it, that's the thing that will turn the story. And I think particularly with short form fiction, the bitiness, I mean, that's a Homer Simpson thing. He refers to something as bitey, and it's and for me, those are the short stories that I love best. Flannery O'Connor is the mistress of that, the bitiness of her.
But so subtle. And I think that's a lovely little segue into Elleke's work, who I do find incredibly subtle and just wonderful. I'm terribly envious of your writing, Elleke, I really am. But what will you be reading for us this evening?
Oh, thanks, Lisa. Well, I've actually been changing my mind as we've been chatting, and as the others have been reading. I may go for one that's a bit less subtle. I was going to read from Evelina, which is the fourth story in and other stories, which is a bit of a kind of it's a riff on another short story. I'm not going to sound pretentious and say who the short story is by, but anyway, it's a riffing sort of story. And so I as we've been talking about prizes, I'll read from the story that was commended for the Elizabeth Jolly Prize in Australia. And it was a huge stretch for me, this story, and I was so pleased that it kind of landed with Australian audiences. So here goes. I must time myself actually, because I can get carried away when reading. So here goes, from Supermarket Love. When I walk by the security office door on my break and it's open, I try to snatch a look. The supermarket security guards keep the door open when it's hot, over 40. Right now, mid-February, that's most of the time. You must get boiling with that headscarf on, my friend Skye says, almost whispering. We've been friends for weeks before she says this. I've seen the other girls wear strappy tops under their brown supermarket overalls. It's only us in the staff room, me and Skye in the plastic chairs, Mo standing against the wall in his silver trainers, drinking Nescafe. Mo glances up. He doesn't miss a thing. I look at him. I look at Skye. It's not as bad as you think, I say. The air conditioning helps. I never get cold. That's what my mother says, Mo murmurs. Columns of black and white CCTV screens cover the security office walls. There are no windows, the same as in the tea room. What can the security guards see on their screens? What can't they see? This is what I want to find out. This is why I peek. But usually I don't get more than a few seconds. The screens all look the same. The aisles all look the same. The security guards sit with their feet up on the desks drinking cold Pepsi. plus right now, they have giant red Valentine's Day cardboard hearts hanging in the aisles, blocking the view. Defeats the purpose, you might say. Gives ideas, my mother might say. More ways than one, I think to myself. Already I know the place I'm looking for won't be the frozen goods aisle, its corridor of smooth fridge doors. Nowhere to hide there, and freezing cold too. It also won't be the open plan sweets area with the help yourself display units, the imported Valentine's Day chocolates in stacks of red and pink. Everything in the sweets area is waist high. The supermarket expects sweets and chocolates to go. Also grapes, cherries, cherry tomatoes, anything that's finger food. Mo says so. Some days we set out sample trays of cherry tomatoes. They all go in 20. Everyone does it, Mo says. He's worked here for longer than us girls have. He's been in this country for longer too. Stuff just walks into people's mouths, he says. Smarties, plain old marshmallows, jelly babies. Everyone thinks they can sample one or two without anyone noticing. Maybe no one does. The security guards wait for bigger prey. My heart jumps. It jumps the minute he says, "You won't believe how much just walks." Mo, I see, is also taking looks at the screens. Mo is also wandering about places out of sight. But then, who wouldn't want to find a hidden place somewhere to break up their day? Who wouldn't take a moment to skate, slide, twirl a trolley? Sky once turned a somersault. It was quiet, close to closing. She did it in a second, flick, flack, just like that.
Oh, it's so lovely. Do you know, I mean, Elleke, if you don't mind me mentioning your day job to the audience, I mean, you know, you're a leading academic at Oxford, aren't you? A professor of world literature and English. And so, you know, but yet your stories for me, when I was kind of reading through the collection, they're all set very, you know, all these different places. So obviously where your kind of research and your work is, you know, heavily influential, but yet the characters are going nowhere. Do you know what I mean? They go nowhere at all, or they're yearning to be elsewhere. So I think I'm going to ask firstly a practical question, which is, how important do you think it is to have an overarching theme when putting a collection together?
Well, thanks, Lisa, for I mean, I think that's a very, very interesting kind of insight, and there are different ways of going with it. So thank you for it. So the shape was quite important to me in this collection. I mean, there's 12 stories, and I was thinking of, you know, 12 as a very sort of pleasing number because it's a calendar year, you know, and it's one of those lovely numbers that's divisible by lots of other numbers, so things fall into clusters of 3 and 4 and the pair up, and lovely things you can do with that number. And then there's also a bit of an arc across the collection, so that we begin with stories that are more about young people, young women, by and large, not only, and then we end with stories about people who are older and facing death in one case. So yeah, that gave me a lot of pleasure, doing kind of, you know, messing around with patterns, as we do when we write short stories. Again, it's part of the intensity. I mean, on my day job, as you mentioned the unmentionable, Lisa, it's funny, isn't it? I try to I try to keep those two kinds of writing quite separate, although of course they come from the same brain.
yeah. But it does cross over, doesn't it? I mean, you know, I suppose as academics, we have to have, one thing has to complement the other and one thing has to be, you know, so it is, do you heavily research stories? I mean, Hannah, Elaine, do you heavily research, or is it just something that interests you? that you feel like you want to write about?
I feel very strongly that I have to protect my creative practice from an academic practice.
Yeah.
My PhD was in creative writing, but writing the novel, I had to really protect that kind of novel from the kind of academic kind of thinking, the thinking that was informing it. So I think I really kind of try and separate those two kind of approaches. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of research. I'll do it as I need to, you know. So start with the image or the bitiness or the kind of the final kind of tableau, and then if I'm kind of writing, which I am doing actually at the moment, I'm writing something that does require quite a bit of research, but I'm doing it kind of as I go, kind of creating a context in which I'm writing. So the context is the research, and it's, you know, it's only research that I'm interested in. Obviously, I wouldn't put myself in that I wasn't interested in writing, and then as I come across other things that I need to know, is on a need to know basis, is what I'm saying.
No, I'm just always interested in that, because as I say, we're all kind of academics in one stretch of the imagination, and often I know when you're kind of teaching students as well, you'll talk about the importance of research and the importance of preparation and really planning work, perhaps more for longer works of prose. And I was just interested to see how much that element infiltrated into our own work. You know, do we practice what we preach, really?
Lisa, for historical stories, I definitely do a ton of research. In fact, I probably spend most of my time doing the research. And then it all comes out in this. And what's interesting, actually, is that in writing the historical story, you end up putting a lot of research in, and then you strip it all out.
Yes, you do. It's true, isn't it? Yeah.
But saying that, it doesn't mean that the historical research doesn't actually make its way into the story. It leaves traces and residues. And so I actually think that, you know, it sort of seeps and sediments in your own head as you're living, you know, that era or whatever. And so in order for it to feel authentic, I actually think that no part of that research can you actually forego, even if it does not make it onto the page. I also actually, in contrast to Hannah, do quite a bit of research. It's part of my mulching process. In any character, you know, if a character has a job that I don't do, I will end up doing more research just in that process of steeping, thinking about it before I put even a single word on the page.
I'm somewhere between Hannah and Elaine. I don't like to over research. I think it can kind of constrict a story or a novel. In fact, Evelina, the story that I was going to that I was going to read from and then didn't, is set in the airport in Buenos Aires. You know, it felt entirely right to set it there, but I had at the time that I wrote it not been through Buenos Aires airport. I've never touched down there. And so I just, but then airports are quite generic. So you can kind of, you know, I invented things, and I invented a viewing window and this view from the viewing window. And then imagine my joy when 2 years after finishing the story, actually it was still I was still messing around with it, but it was more or less finished. Anyway, I did touch down in Buenos Aires airport, and I was like a kid. I was rushing around this airport looking for the viewing window. I really wanted there to be this viewing window. I imagined very clearly, and it wasn't really there. So anyway.
Because it's the Buenos Aires of your story. It's the viewing window of your story, rather than the one that exists in the parallel universe, which is our physical, you know, the physical world.
Can I just ask a more sort of maybe a more pragmatic question? As short story writers, are you writers that give thought to plot and structure? Is it something that comes to you straight away, or is it more story, voice, character? I'm always personally interested in this.
I can give that one a go with a little anecdote.
Yeah.
I used to, when I was in my late teens, I used to babysit for a writer who will go unmentioned.
Name them.
a very well-known writer, I have to say. And he used to leave his elaborate plotting that margins of the paper and on any old bit of paper lying around in the kitchen. Just making my cups of tea and babysitting his kids, I couldn't help noticing these bits. And I was already writing at that point, and I remember thinking that's too much. My approach is rather to kind of plunge in and see where the story takes.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, because I mean that's part of the question, really. You know, certainly if you've got a longer work in prose, and that plotting and prep is almost essential, isn't it? Really, I've got friends that will use an Excel spreadsheet, but for a short story, I don't think I've plotted a short story in my life. Do you know what I mean? It is organic, isn't it? The way, Elaine, yeah.
I completely second that. I was just raising my hand to second that.
Yeah.
I've never plotted a short story in my life. Yeah.
Yeah.
A novel is a different thing, though. I find that, and I'm nowhere near as accomplished as Elleke and Hannah, who've both written, published novels. You know, I think that you need some scaffolding, some plotting for a novel.
And for a short story, I think that's why I workshop my work with Claire Keegan, because I'm aware that there is a technical aspect to short story writing which does involve plot and mechanics, and that's the bit that I'm least confident about. And so that's why I go to her, and she's brilliant. She has a great thing, I think, that's really helpful, where she says the middle of the story, the middle of a short story is when it's too late. And you're thinking, too late for what? Too late for what? And
I'm going to write that down.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
And with that in the back of your head, I think you can sometimes go, oh, hang on, I haven't even got to the middle of my story yet. You know, it's a technical thing about the turn of a short story. And she talks very clearly about the kind of structure that a short story demands. And that is her kind of joy, and that's her strongest. And I love her stories, so I'm going to listen to anything she says about them.
Yeah, and I'm just going to ask one more, because I think it might be quite a good way then into introducing Candida. Candida, tell everybody about why our unplotted, unstructured short stories all go together. But it's endings, and it is one of those things that I personally, as a lecturer, always find quite a little bit difficult to teach, because how do you know when your short story is ended? And because I am somebody who suddenly just recognizes that's the line, and then I just abandon it. I just kind of think, that's it. If I start writing anymore, I'm going to ruin it. I'm going to over egg the pudding, as my nan would say. How does it work for you?
Me? Are you?
No, sorry. I was asking this. Yeah, in Hannah and Elleke and Elaine, any sort of advice on the way you approach endings?
I mean, I would go along with what you just said there, Lisa. It's you kind of know when it's done. I also agree with Claire Keegan's advice that the middle is already too late. It's something that's very visceral and very intuitive in the form too, even though it is a very focused, concentrated form, that everything needs to be there in the beginning, and then it kind of, and then there comes a point when it's done, and sometimes you do write beyond that point, and then you see later. I often have this when I'm falling asleep, and then the thing is to remember it in the morning.
I know, I get that.
You suddenly say, oh, actually, those two last paragraphs, I don't need them. I can take them away.
Yeah.
So at the end of Supermarket Love, there is a twist that I'm actually quite pleased with still to this day, and that's suddenly out.
Were you about to say something, Hannah, or?
only just that with novels I tend to begin with the final image, so I'm writing my novel towards that ending. Not so much with a short story. I don't do that. I begin with the beginning of a short story, and I think it's like you and Elleke have said, you know, that actually each point you go, oh, okay, cadence and music, la 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 la.
Or up, as the case may be. So I'm going to move on to you now, Candida, if I may. You've been very patient whilst we've all been shedding our secrets. What went on behind the scenes of all our collections, and you're so kind to join us, because I thought it would be useful, particularly for the Wolverhampton students that have joined us tonight. Just what you look for in a short story collection as a publisher. I know there's a very big question that's come out in the chat, but I think it's all going in terms of what you will talk about. Certain things like, is there a preference for how many stories make a good collection? Is it important for the short story collection to have an arc? You know, what is it that publishers tend to look for, or you personally, in a short story collection?
Yeah, I can only speak for myself. I think that why I jumped in on the endings was I actually remember some really interesting meetings with Hannah when we were going through Chiew. Do you remember? And we would take out often the last sentence or the last sentence or two. So that's why I suddenly felt guilty, hands up, about that. I think that I can't say as a generalization about the number of stories, or because in fact we've never commissioned on that basis. I started when Myriad started publishing fiction, we were publishing a lot of debut authors, and debut authors frequently, we were publishing just novels, but debut authors, as we've all alluded to tonight, often bite their teeth on cut their teeth on short fiction, because it seems a way into fiction writing. It seems more manageable. Obviously, now you've all been there, you know how difficult it is and much harder than a novel, but it is a way in, and there are also many more opportunities for publication in magazines and for competitions with a short story. It seems doable, you can test the ground. So we run a competition, we now do it every couple of years or so, called First Drafts, which was a competition for work in progress. And a lot of the entries we were getting were short stories, because obviously a short story is a work in progress to a whole collection. And so it seemed, and then personally, I love and have always absolutely loved short stories. I love the punch of them, the immediacy, the way a good short story will burn on your brain. I just, so my bedside table, I had short stories piled up. Like Elleke, I remember that moment of the Alice Monroe winning the prize, and in fact the same year Lydia Childs won the International Man Booker. The following year George Saunders won the Folio, and it was suddenly like, oh wow, our short stories are people finally waking up to the short story. And I just felt we as Myriad really should be publishing short stories, and so we have you four. I'm so proud. It's so lovely to see you all on screen. It's just it's a real delight. But Lisa, it was your collection. You were the first collection of short stories we published. And so actually what was great about that, and so your collection was pretty much in place, bookended by, and I knew your name, of course, and I knew your work. We did a bit of moving around with what was in the collection, but I mean, it was pretty much there, and it was very much about, you say what I loved about yours. I loved that the voice, the regionality. I love the variety you can get in a collection, and as you've all been talking about, whether it's the variety, whether it's the characters, whether it's the time periods, you can go between the different voices. I mean, I just think a collection can pack such a punch. It's sort of like, this is such good value, and in terms of the brain. And I suppose that once we had yours in place, I wanted to build around it, and it was sort of became a bit of a mission. I really want to do something about short stories, and I suppose very broadly, again, my personal tastes are in literature are sort of, you know, if I had to generalize, it would be feminism in as much as the female gaze I'm very interested in, and cultural diversity. And I think that the sort of thing, like with the four of you, that you all encompass those two things very, very strongly. And I think that that sense of cultural roots, and I think, Elaine, you've talked about this before, you know, roots as in putting down roots, and then roots where you're going, and those flows between them are very important. And obviously that can happen with Elaine's work and Elleke's work, actually between geographical places, but it can also happen in very particular places. It can happen about social mobility. It can happen, as in Hannah's, between almost a morphing of different characters, you know, that so all of those things, that doesn't, so I'm sorry, that can't give you an easy answer to your students about what are we looking for in short story collections. I think that I love, I think, I mean, we're doing another first drafts competition next year. It'll be next summer, and that will be specifically for short stories, and that will be a great thing, I think, for students to look at. And then there are lots of other competitions, you know, they're the big ones like the BBC, there's the Sunday Times. I mean, the BBC short story competition is fantastic because they're judged anonymously. So you have a Hilary Mantel short story against a completely new writer. You know, it's a fantastic opportunity. You know, as we say, sort of Miss Lecture, there are so many competitions, and I would just say to people, you must enter every possible competition that you can, and then start sort of building. And then I think from the other side, I have loved seeing how your collections have developed and working with you, because editorially it's just such a joy having those decisions about, I mean, Elleke, I thought you described that narrative arc you've got across the collection really well. And in fact, there was a little tiny bit of shifting around, but not one story, and I will say why if you were too humble to say why, but Evelina is in homage to Joyce and the Dubliners, and is number 4, and it had to stay as number 4, and all the rest could shuffle around, but that had to stay as number 4. And those sort of details are wonderful, I think, and the fact that, you know, you as authors have thought so carefully about the order and about why. And, you know, we talk about which story goes first, which story do you end with. There's a sort of sense of the bookends are really important. Which one do you put in the middle? And then you think, actually, you've no idea how the reader is going to approach it. You know, they're not necessarily going to read a collection chronologically at all. So you're sort of flying a bit blind on it, but it's still, nevertheless, it's got a whole different dimension to the editorial process, I think, and a lovely thing to talk to an author about, because it's sort of interrogating you about, why have you put this here? You know, what happens if you juxtapose these in a different way? Because then if you are reading it chronologically, you might have a whole different experience of it, or with different voices, or with different tenses. You know, here we have 3 short stories all written in the first person. Well, maybe it's good to break them up and have some in the third person, or some in the past and present, you know, to actually have that variety within this sort of holistic form. So, you know, I'm just fascinated by it endlessly. And I've heard you all read before, and I know your collections really well, but I'm sitting here saying, yeah, great.
Yeah, and I think actually as well, what Myriad you know, do so well, I mean, just listening to, you know, Elaine, Elleke and Hannah read, is how we, and certainly with Bill's mothers as well, is how we all approach the stories of womanhood. You know, we're all looking at women in our own, you know, and that relationship with self and identity and place. And I just, you know, having read everybody's collections, which I could happily go away and read again, I'm really struck by how how many interpretations of a woman we've all managed to be able to do. And, you know, you said this is something that you're personally interested in, but it's not really what, you know, obviously it's not the only thing, is it? You know,
no, but I think that the short story again is a very good place to actually feature unsung heroes,
yes,
you know, and less heard voices, that you can bring the characters who would be marginal in a novel. There they are, they're taking second to stage, and you've just gone straight into them at their kitchen table and their lives, you know, open wide, or in the supermarket, or wherever they are, in the departure lounge. And I think that's what I find fascinating as well. And as you're doing it about, you know, Lisa and Elaine, you talked about sort of celebrating dialects that are dying out and regional voices, and you can do that in a short form so well, I think.
And how do you feel about the sort of experimental side of it? I mean, you know, sometimes I think, you know, one of the things that I often introduce students to is more experimental fiction. You know, one of the stories I always try and incorporate is Jennifer Egan's To Do, you know, the listicle device, because I just think it's wonderful on so many levels.
Definitely.
But I mean, is anything like, does that catch your eye? Or
yeah, definitely. I think that because it is just a place, it's perfect for experimentation. And I also think that's again why the short story is attractive for emerging writers, is because within a collection you can have something that is quite a conventional narrative right next to something that's really experimental. And so that sense of, I think, I can't remember which one of you said it, about, you know, writers are always told about, you know, to find their voice, and but in fact, yeah, there are many different voices, and it's being happy with those many different voices. And here you have a form that cradles those many different voices. You know, you actually want that variety, I think, in a collection. It lends itself to it, you know, right from sort of, I don't know, Sherwood Anderson and Weinsberg, Ohio, and you have all the people in all the towns come in. And I think that experimental, so many of the experimental short stories I'm thinking of, they add to that sort of haphazard and fleeting nature of the short story, which is why it's so different from a novel. You know, in a novel you've got that whole, the planning, the structuring, the plot, the backstory, you know, the characters have to stand up, and you do away with all that in a short story, and you have this, I mean, it's incredibly radical. You just have this sort of fleeting, haphazard, this is how we live, actually. And so some of that linguistic experimentation that you've seen in short stories quite recently, it's almost like, well, you know, that's just overheard at the bus stop, or, you know, it's much more impressionistic. And I think that that's what, again, I love. And talking about, you know, endings and the difference between an ending of a novel and an ending of a short story. I mean, I know it's different with more postmodern fiction, but, you know, traditionally a novel, you're looking for a resolution of sorts in an ending, whereas with a short story, it's the impression, that's what you are taking away with it. So I think it's that, and I think that real punch, the twist, you know, it's a form that is it's almost offering you itself to what can you do with this play. I mean, in a way, I think it's more akin to poetry than it is to the 19th century novel, in that sense of the language has to work so hard, that the sentence, the juxtaposition of sentences, the spaces between them, the layout of the language, you know. I was very concerned with some of the short stories when we were converting them for ebooks, because, I mean, again, rather like poetry, you have to be careful how it flows onto a device, because the spacing can be crucial, as it would be with poetry.
I think what you say about the radical nature of short story is really important, because it's something that came out of all the kind of anti-racist education, the unlearning that we were doing this summer. Was the multiplicity of, say, Black experience, and similarly, you know, the multiplicity of female experience that we're all writing about is really crucial, and that's what you can convey in a short story collection. There is no one way of being a person.
Exactly.
And the short story collection obviously lends itself to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also want to pick up the point that you made about unsung heroes. And, you know, in the Heartsick diaspora, obviously, I did do one of those with respect to the Samsui women, the construction workers that were brought over from China to Singapore. And, you know, it's amazing that these women were construction workers.
Extraordinary.
Yeah, you know, and they're very much unsung heroes because a lot of people have just never even heard of them. But it's also for the writer a way to kind of explore whether or not this could be something bigger. And sometimes you find out, what you find out is that you actually, you know, it may not be a novel for you. It may not be big enough for you to stay with it for a novel, but something about that still stays. So I'm very much interested in the era, you know, that has come to roost, even though, you know, the unsung heroes themselves, I don't feel that I have the ability to tell that story in a novel form.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah. And I think just on that, Elaine, you know, often it's almost like when you've got quite a strong polemic that exists within your story. I mean, I often say when I get very frustrated about something politically, I can't do anything about it, but I can write about it. And it makes me feel like my message or my meaning, I can get it down in 2,000-3,000 words, and people won't feel as pummeled by the politics, say, as perhaps they would with a novel. You know, I know, say Abdul, which ends my collection, is a really political story.
We can hear something from you, Lisa, before we...
Oh, well, I was going to go to questions first to see if anybody's got some questions, because I know I'd rather the because the students have heard me anyway. But Candida, Francesca is just asking if the first drafts 2021, would you be able to give us an insight, because she says the competition was cancelled owing to COVID this year. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, we'll launch it in the summer, and in fact what we're doing, we're tying it into a particular publication that we are bringing out in September, so it'll sort of run alongside that, and it's just a way of shining a brighter light on those emerging writers. We hope that's the idea anyway, but there will be news on our social media in the new year.
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say, which I'm sure everybody will support as well, is don't be afraid to submit.
Oh no, definitely.
Because I think, you know, there has to come a point where you have to send something out. Do you know what I mean? It's I had so many things stuck in Morrison's carrier bags that I just thought I would never show to anybody, but there does come a point where you think, no, I'm just going to give this a shot, because it's also subjective and you never know who's going to read it.
Yeah, definitely. And also I would say don't be put off if you get some rejections, you know, carry on, because this is an art. Publishing is an art, it's not a science. It's about taste, and it's about what might be right, not right for one editor will be right for another. So you have to just get a thick skin and just carry on looking for every opportunity. I mean, Hannah, actually, I think it was She Clown. Hannah is a previous runner-up in 2 first drafts competitions. 3, was it 3? And She Clown, that's where I first came across you with She Clown, because I think She Clown was the first competition, wasn't it? And it was that we went back to. And so She Clown was there from like 2011.
It was, I was shortlisted a couple of times, well, 3 times, and never won the competition. But, you know, it was because that then helped. I was like the bridesmaid, never the bride.
But then we published your first novel, and then, but it was still this sort of sense of, but do you still write short stories because you're so damn good at them? You know?
Clown was also the kind of the genesis of my second novel, so she gave me a lot. I had
that's true.
A lot of mileage out of She. But it was a way for anybody kind of listening and thinking, oh, you know, shall I submit? Submit, because even if you don't win, it establishes a relationship with, you know, someone like Myriad as a publisher, are incredibly open, and they've got very good memories, and they kind of believe in writing that they enjoy so much that actually they kind of start recognizing me. Oh, it's her again, you know. But then that's what, you know, it's her again. I mean, might as well pull her in, see what she's got to say for herself. And you know, that's when I said, oh, I got a novel actually, and you published my novel before short stories. So it's always worth it, I think.
Oh,
And
definitely.
I mean, remember even earlier than that, submitting a manuscript that never saw light of day to, I think, Comma Press, another kind of small press.
And they do some fantastic short story collections, brilliant ones. Yeah,
they do. Yeah, I've done a couple of stuff for them actually. They're very good. Really good. And I think that's the thing of working with independent presses as well, is that you are able to grow as a writer. You know, so do you not feel, you know, you feel like you're really developing and encouraged to, you know, to write something different or write something in the same vein, and it always feels like a two-way street, which is always a good thing. Tony is asking, how important is it to have a track record of magazine publications or competition wins before submitting a collection?
I think it's important in as much as, obviously, with it, whether it's an agent or a publisher, you stand out, you know. It immediately flags you if you puts your head above the parapet. If you can say, you know, I've won the Bridport, or I've been shortlisted for this or that or the other, you sort of like, oh well, you know, you do stand out. But I wouldn't, you know, it's like, it's you saying entering for competitions, you can't, unfortunately, that's an unknown quantity. I mean, yeah, definitely submit to them, but if you think you've got a short story ready, or a collection ready, or half a collection ready, then definitely submit to publishers. And there are publishers who will take short story collections. You know, look at the Writers and Artists Yearbook, just look out for things. There's often, and obviously, you know, with social media, there are so many, any opportunity always does the rounds and is really flagged up, as it should be. So I think it's just really keeping your ear to the ground. But as you said, Lisa, also prepare, take it really seriously. You know, short stories are such absolute treasures, and they deserve to be taken seriously. And if the collection takes 10 years, fine, get on with the day job, the novel, the whatever else you do alongside it. But you know, treasure it, nurture it, marinate it. It's worth it.
Yeah. And it is, I mean, to a certain extent, I think as a writer, you do have an inner belligerence. I don't know whether it's true of you guys. I always say diligence and belligerence, you know, and it is like that. The rejections, after I've kind of had a bit of a sob, I start to kind of think, no, you know, and you kind of have to do that in a way. But one of the things I think I found as a writer with the short story platform is that there is actually so many platforms out there in terms of competitions, in terms of online forums, you know, thresholds, you know, the short story. There are so many avenues for you to try and get your work out there. And there are people willing to read as well. You know, try and not be suckered in by those that might, you know, are not a little bit devious. But there's some genuinely really supportive platforms out there, which is encouraging this community of short story writing.
And there's also, you know, I think in the US, I think North America, they have fantastic short story writers, and it's no accident. It's because they've got a lot of opportunities for short story writers as well, and a lot of competitions, and a fantastic tradition. You know, I mean, Scott Fitzgerald and Herman Melville, all sorts of people paid off their debts by writing short stories. You know,
I wish.
Story in the Atlantic. Exactly. But the thing is, there are still I mean, obviously, some of them, maybe you have to be resident, God help you, or whatever, you know, there. And, oh, it's all right now. We can be then again. You know what I mean? You can't, you might be able to get a story in places like the Atlantic. You know, there are many more magazine opportunities, I think, in the US.
And I think Elaine actually is a perfect example that, you know, you translate in all different cultures, you know, which is wonderful. It's so, you know, you're proof of the pudding, really, that there are making the most of opportunities on a global basis, and don't be afraid to do so.
I think so. One of the participants actually mentioned flash fiction as well, and that's just a very press short story under 1,000 words. Those are excellent. You can write a lot of them very, very quickly if you're in the groove or in the flow. And, you know, send them out. There's so many journals, and it's a very quick way to build a track record.
Definitely.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And actually also someone has said in the chat that reader reports on your submissions can be really, and I so agree with that. Editorial interventions, you know, or sort of, you know, a feedback like, you know, we really enjoyed that, but it's not quite there yet. Think about X. That can be really helpful, but you're not going to get that kind of helpful feedback if you're not submitting and if you're you know, putting your work out there.
You're also
speaking of Alice Monroe, there was a I came to hear via that, you know, her stories for the New Yorker were quite heavily edited back in the day when she first began. That was quite comforting.
Yes, I felt that as well. You know, part of me felt, well, or even the genius was edited.
Of course, everybody needs to be edited. I think, and I think she probably would have been the first to say that as well.
Yes, yeah. Well, we're coming towards the end. I think we're nearly a couple of minutes away, and I just wondered if all of you might be so kind as to give one piece of advice to potential short story writers out there, if there is something that you kind of live and die by, or something that you would like to pass on, what would it be?
Read loads of short stories.
Yes.
Because actually then you discover what kind of short story is you're interested in writing.
So read lots. Elleke?
Tell lots. Speak to them. Tell, you know, just talk about things with other people who are interested. Yes.
Elaine?
You're on mute.
Mute. I know, but bless her. It's.
I would say don't undersell yourself.
Yes. So there we go. Read lots, tell lots, don't undersell yourself, and mine would be belligerent.
Yeah, good.
Keep it on. Hannah, Elleke, Elaine, Candida, thank you so much. I really hope it has been enjoyable for you as it has for me. It's been lovely to see you guys. I've felt like it was a little bit like the Eurovision Song Contest, going from Singapore to Brighton to Oxford. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who has been watching. I really hope it's been useful. And well, you can buy all our books from myriadeditions.com. Yes, this is when we all show our books. Mine's unfortunately covered in post-its as part of my questions. They're also available on bookshop.org. If you could go there rather than the dastardly Amazon, that would be wonderful, because we're all trying to support that. And the first drafts, obviously, don't forget, next summer. And yeah, come join the team. And Merry Christmas, and let's hope for a better new year for us all. Guys, it's been wonderful.
2021.
Thank you for having us, and Lisa, thank you for having us and hosting us, and also huge congratulations for winning the Arnold Bennett.
Oh, thank you.
We just learned about the weekend before last, and that's a real achievement. So well done.
Thanks, guys. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.